carrying on with the case of the attack on two old people while in their home. The chief officer in command at the time was Mike Bowron. Now, by right, in his office, there was a book. Any official complaints should go in this book, and any investigation reports will be in the book with it, explaining what the accusations were and how they've been attended to. I can bet you £1 and a penny to a penny that you won't find anything in the book when Mike Bowron was there. And it's probably because his professional standards department look after all the so-called paperwork. Now, just after the case had finished, I met Mike Bowron, the chief officer in town, corner of Library Place and Newcut, doing his walkabout as usual. I said, "Can you spare a few minutes, Chief?" He said, "Yes," with a big smile. Yes, how can I help you?" I said, "Well, I'd like to talk to you," I said, "about a case," I said, "involving sophisticated petrol bombs." He looked at me, and then he literally turned and ran off into King Street. Left me standing there. Now, this is a police chief. Why would he do that? Second time in town, this is all because I can't get to meet him in his office. Second time in town, I saw him. I said, "Chief," I said, "I asked you about a case." "I don't want to know about it." He said, "I don't want to know about petrol bombs. I don't want to know anything." I said, "You're the chief of police." He said, "Yes, I've got to sit on the fence." I said, "Fine." I said, "Well, give me a name or a telephone number I can talk to at the police station." "No," he said, "I don't want nothing to do with it." He said, "Go away, leave me alone." Okay, fine. So the third time I saw him in town, I'd already made an official complaint against, official complaint against him. I said, "What's this in the Evening Post, our daily paper?" I said, "You haven't got any complaints against him?" "No," he said, all with a big smile, "I've got no complaints against me whatsoever." I said, "Well, that's strange." I said, "I've made a complaint about you." I said, and a team of your force." I said, "I've made an official complaint." I said, "Very damning." "No," he said, "I've got nothing." So I said, "What kind of a world are you in?" He said, "No," he said, "I've got nothing." I said, "Are you some kind of twat or something that you don't know what's going on in your force?" And he said, "Stop that or I'll get you arrested." So I looked at him, I said, "I can't believe it." I said, "You don't know what's going on in your force?" I said, "And you've got no complaints?" "No," he said, "Nothing." So I left him like that. Now, if you call a police chief a twat to his face, I would have thought I'd have been arrested. No, he didn't want to know about it. Told me to go away. Anyway, all this should be in his book, in his office, and so should the report, the investigation report. But I doubt if you'll find anything, because for 9 months the Police Complaints Authority told me they were doing one, and on the 10th month they said no, they're not. So they were lying for 10 months. Anyway, as we move on, we've got Robin Smith as the chief officer. Now, when I write to him, but of course it's the professional standards department that reads all the mail that goes in. I made a complaint against this chap at the professional standards, Mark Afey. Now, this is a chap where when he was a sergeant, he was involved in a very serious road accident. He killed a young married lady and badly injured her partner. He was pulled up for a careless driving. Now, when this went to court, the magistrate was Ian Lamarckle, and all the way through the court sessions, not once was the fatality mentioned. And because it was careless driving, the magistrate said, "No, you're not guilty, you're a policeman." Even though he'd killed a woman outright, he T-boned her car, he was on the wrong side of the road, T-boned her car and badly injured her husband. Outside the court, the husband couldn't believe it, that his wife wasn't even mentioned. Now this man there, he started off as a sergeant, then he's a police inspector, now he's even gone further up with Robin Smith in charge. This is the man that I made a very damning official complaint against. He told me he'd read the report on my accusations, and I said, right, well, send me the original report and I can read it. But this cocky little sod, instead of sending me the original report, he fabricates a report, types it out on Northern Ireland Police Service, or Police Service of Northern Ireland headed paper, and sends it to me. No reference numbers, no letters, no signature, nothing. I said, this isn't the original report. He said, well, as far as I'm concerned it is. He said, and the case is over. I said, no, the case is not over. I said, you're not high enough to close it. I said, I haven't seen anything, I said, which has answered my accusations, my very serious accusations of these police officers. I said, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Anyway, this went on, and that's when I sent the video of me holding a revolver across my chest, a blank firing revolver. The question here is, why did the police not come to me within 24 hours? I know I've asked before, but why? This is the Rapid Response Firearms Unit. Why not come to me within 24 hours? I was expecting them. I had the cameras on at the door and everything. I was expecting them. In fact, when they came, I was watching them downstairs come in through my I can't believe it. And I've asked all the people, why was there such a delay in coming to a person's home with a suspect revolver? And not once has anybody answered my questions. All these people are guilty of covering up a very serious case. And this is the case of John Yates, the unstable alcoholic, because his nephew was Crown Advocate Conrad Yates. And even Tim LeClock, who was the Attorney General there, allowed it to go into the Magistrates' Court as for minor cases. He allowed it to go there and participated in covering this case up. I had to write to him saying it wasn't a knife he carried through town, it was a sword. He said, well, it doesn't make much difference. I said, it would be if you were standing in front of him. And now he's an attorney, now he's the bailiff. I've asked him, he said, I can't remember the case at all. I bet he can't. So I said, well, look, come home to my address. I said, I've got all the papers and I can show you all the stuff that was left out, all the evidence left out, I said, which proves my case. I said, this case was covered up. I said, and you took part in it as well. No. So he's got now the new Attorney General to cover his backside. But nobody will answer why it took 10 weeks to come to my home to get this my weapon. Why? It goes on and on and on. These people are a group of people. I've asked many politicians for help all the way along the line. I had one politician who gave me a hand, but they ended up getting rid of him. Apart from that, all the others are too frightened to rock the boat. They don't want to rock the boat. Jersey this is getting to be a very serious, and that's why I'm still going. This is a very serious, criminally corrupt case. Not just done by one policeman, by 5 policemen, plus the Home Affairs Department, plus the Jersey Police Complaints Authority, and it goes right up to the magistrate, who shouldn't have allowed this case in her court, Magistrate Bridget Shaw, where my mail was intervened and sent to Home Affairs Minister Ian Lamarco. Christina Moore, when she took over from Ian Lamarco as the Minister for Home Affairs, she wrote to me saying, I've read the story, as far as I'm concerned your case is closed. I said, you can't do that. I said, you haven't got the authority And I said, how can you say the case is closed and you read my story? I said, you haven't even met me. I said, you don't know what my story is. I said, I've got all the evidence. No, she said, it's closed as far as I'm concerned. So I kept writing to her, and then her deputy chief officer, Constable Deirdre Mesburian, she wrote to me saying, well, do you want us to investigate it, but do you want us to get the Northern Ireland Police Service to come and investigate again? I said, no. I said, but I'd like to speak to you. I said, as a constable, and because you're the deputy of the Minister of Home Affairs. Anyway, I wrote to her and said, could I meet you at your office in St Lawrence? Got no reply. And then I wrote again, and then I had a phone call. No, from the secretary. The Deirdre doesn't want to meet you and doesn't want to speak to you. I said, well, look, I just want to speak to her for 5 minutes. I said, I want to know what's going on in this case and why she asked, would I want the Police Service of Northern Ireland to come back again? Anyway, I said, well, look, if you can't, I said, book me in. I said, I only want 10 minutes call an hour. Oh, I can't book you in. She's taking the book with her. I said, okay, I'll ring up tomorrow. I rung up tomorrow. The secretary says, don't come up, don't annoy her. She doesn't want to see you, doesn't want to speak to you. I said, but she's the constable of St Lawrence. I said, and she's on this case, she's the deputy chief minister for Home Affairs. I said, why is it she doesn't want to speak to me? I said, has she got something to hide or frightened of something? She said, she doesn't want to speak to you, don't come up, she won't talk to you. You won't be let in. Now why? Nobody has sat down and explained this case and why all this corruption has gone on. Nobody wants to sit down and talk about it, because it starts from the bottom with the police. And as I say, being old, this was supposed to just fade away and I get fed up. But after all these years, I'm still here. The evidence, I still have all the evidence, all the lies, the letters they sent me, every little bit, access data that I've received, which proves my point that everybody was lying and covering up this case. This is disgusting. And as for the Robin Smith, our new chief officer, I've written a few times, and as I said, I demanded they come here. Why can't I speak to the chief officer? Why is it that I'm not allowed to speak to anybody? Even the Evening Post reporters, 3 of them, they won't write an article on what went on in the case. They won't even put down the weapons he had when he attacked us. Now, for petrol bombs, somebody has to make them. So somebody, which he admitted to making them. If you make petrol bombs, you have to have a reason for making them. Now, what was his reason for making them? Petrol bombs with batteries. 2 of them. Why? This has to be answered. You can't bury it. The catapult, the powerful catapult, and the large steel ball bearings he used in the attack on us, my wife and I. Why did the Attorney General, Tim Lecoq, dismiss this in the case? Why did he dismiss the weapon that was used in the unstable alcoholic attack? Unprovoked. I'd never wound him, John Yates, up. Well, so why did he dismiss the weapon that he used? It was to cover up all this case. And as I say, this isn't just one thing, this goes on all the time. It's a group of people that all stick together. Well, I'm 77 years old now, I'm disabled, and I'm still here. And nobody, even when they came in my home with all their machine guns and all that, they didn't frighten me. I was expecting them 10 weeks earlier. I went through all their court sessions and everything, and they made me wait before I went before the court and everything. And as I said, even Assistant Magistrate Peter Harris knew what was going on, and he wouldn't do anything. I asked in court the the police attendant in court, the spokesman. I said, why did you wait 10 weeks to come? He said, I never knew anything about it. Well, there you are. Why? Because it was all covered up, that's why. Anyway, something else will come out of this. I am expecting a backlash, but the truth is the truth, and nothing can be done about it. I've got everything that will back me up. There's no slander here. Nothing at all. They can come here and they can look at my papers. Everything is all in order. He said, I said, I'm not the one lying. I said, I've got you all on paper lying. Every one of you. And covering each other's backside. And that's how it works in Jersey. Anyway. I'm sorry to have imposed this corruption on you, but the world should know what's going on in a little island. An island that's now overcrowded, overpriced. It's ridiculous over here now. Build, 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 and they can't get rid of all the flats, and they're still building like mad. And everybody lying. It's all out to make a fast buck. That's all it is. Anyway, thank you for listening to me, and good health.